COVID has divided nations, communities, and families and brought out cruel and evil responses in people that even the greatest minds are struggling to comprehend. Overnight, violence and murder became welcomed in the name of public health, and officials who trampled on our freedoms became celebrated as heroes. But how do otherwise caring, good hearted people suddenly become unable to discern the difference between right and wrong, between freedom and tyranny, even between treatment and murder? How does a nation go from upholding human rights and dignity to crushing them in a matter of weeks? It's as though humanity has slipped into a mass psychosis, and so few of us are truly able to see it for what it is. Today, I'm going to take a deeper dive into how all of this has been carefully orchestrated by the Chinese Communist Party, the masters of deceit, and how through masterminding the COVID response from top to bottom, they've brought out the worst in all humanity. How they've sent our society scrambling and how they've weakened our economies, our communities, and our spirits for just one purpose: to usher in their communist world order. But there's a catch. There's a powerful weapon in our hands that they'll never be able to conquer. So it ends with us. And today, I'm going to lay out exactly how the CCP has poisoned our society and why we need to come together to fight this common enemy, left and right, Democrat and Republican, men and women, straight, gay, whatever. It doesn't matter. We're human beings first, and our enemy is the red dragon long foretold by religions and prophecies. So join me today and let's discern clearly the nature of our enemy and strengthen our resolve to mend the bonds among our families and communities and reclaim our freedom once and for all. Welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holdhouse, coming to you live from some undisclosed location in Ohio. How's everyone doing? How are you holding up? There have been a lot of ups and downs, left and right, sideways. I feel like the whole world's turned upside down over and over again. And here we are. Okay. Let me know if you all can see me. Sorry about that. It seems like whenever we cover these more important topics, we have these tech issues. That's a new one though. That's a new one. So let me know if you can see me in the comments. And once I get a few confirmations, then let's go, Brandon. So all right, we're back. Sorry about that, folks. So as we're okay, just as I was saying, a few housekeeping things before we dive into today's episode. For one, if you haven't yet, I highly recommend that you go to my website, maninamerica.com, and just subscribe to my email list there. Big tech does not like me. They're canceling as much as they can. I don't use the emails that much to communicate with you, but just in case I do get pulled off of some of these platforms, especially YouTube, CommuTube, that way I still have a way to communicate with you. So again, reminder, go to maninamerica.com and just subscribe to the email there. I promise I'll take care of your email. I'm not going to overdo it. The other thing is, please follow me on social media. The biggest place I'm at is on Telegram. That's where I'm the most active. If you haven't used Telegram yet, I highly recommend you set it up. It's a fantastic app, and it's the best way. Not only can you engage with me on there, but you're going to meet a lot of other patriots that are like-minded in the comment sections, etc. So on Telegram, I'm just Man in America, and these links are below. And finally, the at the end of today's show, I'm going to do an exclusive Q&A over on Rise TV. So there's a link below for that as well, which I'll talk about that as we get to the end of the show. So, all right, let's dive into today's show. Now, I know that it's interesting because last night, and actually, over the course of the day, I was really torn between what to cover today. Because for those of you that have been following what's happening with politics, especially here in the U.S., there was a big, kind of red win in Virginia. But there was also, we saw things get screwed up in New Jersey, which of course we expected. And there were some good things happening overall. And I wanted to hone in a little bit and say, hey, look, there's good things happening. There's a positivity going on. Let's go, Brandon. But at the same token, I was also doing some research, and there's a new book that just came out a couple of days ago, all about Xi Jinping and China and COVID and what's happening. And that's why I chose to focus on, not because I'm a pessimist or because I want to focus on the negative things, but I want to focus on the real things. And I'm sorry that I'm not just going to come on here and say, there's a plan and everything's going to be okay, and Trump is in control. Because the reality is that our world is undergoing an attack by you could, what do you want to call them? It's the globalists, it's the communists. I think that the head of the dragon is the Chinese Communist Party, and those folks say, "Oh, what about the Rothschilds and the New World Order and all that?" To be honest, though, I really think, like I said, the tip of the spear, the head of the dragon, is the Chinese Communist Party. If you cut off that head, the dragon will die. It's the easiest way I can put it. So I wanted to focus on this because, to me, this is the real threat. And look, even if we get Republican governors in every single state in America, if we don't solve what's happening with China, we're going to have a really, really hard time, uh, maintaining our freedom in America. Because as we also see, a lot of the Republican governors are rhinos, and they're owned by China. Like, I live in one of those states myself. I live in a state that had lockdowns and mandates, and there's not a whole lot of pressure against Brandon and the White House. So again, that's not the solution. I think it's part of it, and I think it's encouraging. And I'm most encouraged about all the school boards that got replaced with strong conservatives and people that are pushing for good values and getting rid of CRT. But fundamentally, I don't want to lose sight of who the real enemy is. And the real enemy is communism and China. So I want to dive into this, and I'm hoping that this is an episode that you can share with your friends and family. Because if people can see through the lies, and if they can see through the facade and understand that there's no reason why any American should be pitted against any other American. It doesn't matter whether you've got the jab or don't have the jab. It doesn't matter if you're straight, gay, black, white. It doesn't matter. Because if all Americans could recognize that there is a singular enemy that is trying to take away everything that we hold dear, then the American people would truly rise. That, in my opinion, would be waking the sleeping giant. That would be what Japan talked about around Pearl Harbor. If all the American people could come together to fight communism. But to do that, we have to understand who the enemy is. And so, again, that's why I think there's a lot of things to rah and cheer on right now. And I love seeing Ron DeSantis, talking about Biden and let's go Brandon and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I really think right now is the time for us to really hone in and see, how do we fix this fundamentally. So I'm going to bring up some information here for you. This is the book that I was talking about, and this is a long thread. So I will warn you that that today's show is going to be a heavy one. Sorry, I'm not sure what that is there. Okay, so today's show is going to be a heavy one. It's going to be an intense one. I've got a fair bit of reading to do, so I try to be a good reader. I try to make things entertaining. If you'd like, let me bring up my face here for you. So you can see. Let's see. Let me pull myself up here. There you go. There I am. So, okay, you're not going to be without me. But so these links are in the description below. So I highly recommend that you look to them. This book I'm going to be talking about is it's called Snake Oil: How Xi Jinping Shut Down the World. Okay, this is the book itself. And the link to this is a Twitter thread that the author put together, which really gives us a an overview of what's in this book. But this paints a really important picture because if you look at the insanity of what's happening right now, so much of this stuff ties back to what happened in the beginning of 2020 when COVID came out and all of a sudden the whole world's panicking and we've got lockdowns and all this stuff happening. And look, I know that like where I'm at right now, it feels like that lockdowns and all that stuff is a little bit of the past, but don't put it past these governments. Don't put it past things to bring these things back again because that's the plan. As I understand, that's the plan. There is no way for us to get out of this from their plan. They don't want us to escape from this. They want to use this as a perpetual cycle, which I'm going to get into this, right? If you look into psychology of torture and torture victims, everything, it's about giving them pressure, 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 taking it off, relief, relief, pressure, 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 then relief, until eventually you don't know up from down, you don't know left from right. And so, while right now we're not facing, say, nationwide lockdowns, we are facing mandates of all kinds of sorts and we're facing a lot of medical tyranny going on, but I don't expect it to last in this period of like, hey, everything's free again. If you look at what's happening in Australia, where I've got family, things have gotten more and more intense, and they're not letting up over there. So to think that this global syndicate, this crime syndicate that's tied to China, the globalists, to think that they're just going to say, okay, hey, America's off scot free, but we're going to take Australia and drive them into complete dystopian nightmare. I believe that what they're trying to do there is something they want to bring worldwide, but I also don't think they're going to succeed. So let me dive into this article for you. Okay, this book. So basically, this is the actual book itself. Okay, and so introduction. So in March 2020, liberal democracy ground to a sudden stop. Like the Reichstag fire of 1933, historians may never know how SARS came about. For scientists, exploring its origins would be a rewarding endeavor if it weren't precluded by the jackboot of Xi's CCP. But while intelligence agencies spent months investigating the virus's origins, the world employed an unprecedented response that proved far more devastating than the virus itself: mass quarantines modeled on those imposed in China, commonly referred to as lockdowns. It was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe since the Second World War, and it was all for nothing. Lockdowns had never been about science. They'd sprung into global policy on the order of the CCP princeling, who was now the most influential member of the baby boom generation. So now, before I kind of go on to the next part of this, the how this story is outlined, we're going to dig into a little bit of who Xi Jinping is, how he rose to power, and why that's significant, and how basically he's at odds with a lot of the Chinese Communist Party because he's much more of a Maoist communist. Like he wants to bring back Maoist, very harsh style communism. That's how he wants to rule. He's not a more, say, progressive communist that was opening up to the West and believed in fair trade and thought about modernizing things. He's taken things in a very scary streak back the wrong way. But the one thing is that, as I mentioned before, it's important to understand the tool that's been used to get against us. Now, the jabs, those I'll talk about in the kind of second half, the Q&A part. I'm happy to talk about my thoughts on how the jabs fit into all this because I do think that's a big part of this agenda. But because I am on YouTube, I can't. So especially with what I have to say about them. But if you look at the lockdowns, if you look at the whole cycle of what's happening, look at Australia as an example, or look at your local town. Say you're in an area where you experienced lockdowns for 2, 3, 4, 5 months, the social distancing measures, everything. How many small businesses do you see shut down? How many small businesses do you think are on the edge of dying right now? If they put in another lockdown, what's going to happen to so many of those businesses? If they then release it again and put another one in because a new variant comes out, what's going to happen, right? So I know this is a little bit scary, but we have to understand what their plan might be, because then we're going to understand how to counteract it. Because I believe that we will win this. And when I say we, I mean the good people. It might be difficult, but I believe that in the end, God will triumph, and I believe in the end that good people will triumph. But it's not going to be easy. So let's jump back into this article, give you a quick overview of Xi Jinping, his background. So she was born in Beijing in 1953. His father was among party leaders. He was a very notable communist, but he was known for his relative moderation. Okay. So that's in the public sphere. So at home, it was another story. Shi Zhongxun, who was his father, was a brutal disciplinarian who would scream, lash out at his wife, and beat Shi and his siblings. In the public, the model statesman; in private, the tyrant. So Shi's family was persecuted very heavily during the Cultural Revolution. So it says she and his confidants rarely speak of his experiences in the early Cultural Revolution. She's parents were tortured and his father was exiled. She's boarding school was shut, and he and his friends were bullied and beaten relentlessly as a child of a black gang. So it's interesting to note here that when you look at a lot of people that end up inflicting suffering on other people, exactly, Goddess Kepra L, comment, you nailed it on YouTube. Hurt people hurt people. This is it, right? So he had immense suffering as a child, and it was under communism. So you think it's kind of crazy that he would then become a major communist and be putting out communism. But that, again, that's how these things work. If you look at in the psychology, so this is just showing some various indicators of the Cultural Revolution, some of the things that she had to endure. He had to move into a cave, and it was just terrible. He ran away. He was sentenced to forced labor, forced re-education through labor. But this is important though. It says that she later returned to Yan'an and this time threw himself into his work. He officially joined the CCP in 1974 after being rejected 9 times, which is odd. In the words of a friend, she chose to survive by becoming redder than red. So he chose to survive by becoming the most communist. Interesting. Okay. So the clever young Shi was the model party man to the common people. He exemplified patriotic service and family life, while he charmed wide-eyed foreigners with relatable tales of trying to find time for his exercise routine. So what's interesting to think about is that she, in a lot of ways, and I hate making this comparison, but she was kind of like a Donald Trump. He was very intelligent. He was very worldly. He was very successful. He was very calculative. He could sit down with people and talk really high level finance. He could connect with people. He could inspire people. So he was a very, very charismatic person. And as we know, look at Adolf Hitler was very similar. A lot of times, people like that, that personality can very easily go into something that becomes a dictator. And thank goodness, Trump did not go that way, and I didn't believe he would ever at any point, as much as the media want us to think that. So in November 2012, she was elected general secretary of the CCP. Which is important. She was widely expected to be a moderate reformer who would continue leading his country towards openness and global cooperation. He had other plans. So again, a lot of the communists surrounding Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party, they believed that he was going to be a more open, and he was going to really kind of set China onto the course that Deng Xiaoping did when the China really opened up to the West. And they believed that Xi was going to take China and really embrace the Western capitalism, bring more wealth to China, everything. But Xi had other plans. So basically, so the chairman of everything, she assumed his role as general secretary, as understanding his country to be in danger. He had long studied the collapse of the USSR and required his comrades to do the same thing, including the subversion of communism through Western values. It's interesting because we look at communism subverting Western values, but he's trying to say that the Western values are subverting communism. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? So getting into this, so she became the chairman of everything. He acquired 10 titles, assuming control of foreign policy, the internet, the courts, and the secret police. Through his anti-corruption campaign, Xi rooted out tigers and flies. This is a big campaign that I remember happening. I was spending a lot of time in Hong Kong when this happened, doing a lot of business over there. And I saw massive implications when he rolled out his Tigers and Flies campaign, which was under the guise of anti-corruption, but it was really to purge the non-loyalists because there's multiple factions in the Chinese Communist Party, and there's a massive faction that was aligned to the previous supreme leader Jiang Zemin. And so, under the guise of Tigers and Flies, he basically weeded out a lot of the people that weren't loyal to him. Not all of them, though. Okay. And then basically one day, like literally one day, she just issued 2 sentences and said that he was doing away with term limits. That was the power he had. So imagine Biden, God forbid, coming up one day and say, "Hey, look, I just signed an executive order, and there's no longer term limits for presidents. So here you go." Uh, that would not go over very well. But so this is what's interesting. Though, so she revived Maoist demands for conformity, explained that media must serve as the party's throat and tongue. Thousands of churches and mosques across China had been demolished and images of Christ replaced by Xi. So it shows you that picture. Like this is what they're doing. They're literally taking down images of Christ, and replacing it with Xi Jinping and Mao. Again, communism, you can't really have religion because the leaders of the Communist Party, they basically hold the position of God. That's how they position themselves in society. So there's also a massive war on Western values happening. So Xi's war on Western values includes surveillance and coercion of dissidents, students, and media outside China. The CCP bribes foreign officials, buys foreign media companies, sponsors foreign protests, intimidates foreign researchers, activists, and media personalities. I haven't been targeted yet, but I'm covering Xi Jinping right now. So Xi, I'm looking out for you if you're coming after me. All right. So this goes into there's more details here. And I'm gonna have to skip through a lot of this because it's there's just an incredible amount of information. So I see that Stacy DTG asking whether devolution fits in with this, and I'm not going to get into devolution in this discussion, but I do think that a big part of devolution involves China. So again, I'm not going to speak to as to whether I think it's actually happening or not. There's indicators of it. I think it's weakened. I think that the enemy has really worked us over, but I do think there is a plan, and a lot of it does involve China. And again, if you go back to Trump, look at how much Trump continues to hammer on China, even talking about the trillions of dollars that China owes the United States, all these things. So Trump understands China's roles. Mike Pompeo understands China's role. So I do believe that that Trump and the military do know China's plan and are working to counteract it. That's the that's the best way to put it. Okay. So now this is a very important part of this topic now, is understanding how the West has opened up to China. So I'm going to read a little bit. I've got a little segment of the book. So I had the ebook. So I'm going to read a little bit here. This is really important, actually. So Kissinger and Silicon Valley. The venomous embrace between Western elites and China began half a century ago. Actually, I'll just do this. So it's okay. The venomous embrace between Western elites and China began half a century ago when Henry Kissinger argued that relations with the CCP could drive a wedge between China and the USSR. So Henry Kissinger basically used the excuse that we're at war with the USSR. So if we really become buddy buddy with China, then that might become a wedge between China and the USSR, which would hurt the USSR. So I think it was the worst decision we've ever made as a nation. So glasses clinked as China opened for business and the Soviet Union collapsed. It was a masterstroke. Even for a wonderkind like Kissinger, and China became the cornerstone of his legacy. Surely Kissinger felt such a feat entitled him to a bit of spoils, just a nibble, after all. China was still a poor country, far from a geopolitical rival. So this is the thing, is that China has ensnared us. And this is a really critical point to understand what's happening right now worldwide. What started as a nibble became an addiction, and Kissinger grew rich as he greased access to Chinese officials, paving the way for more influential peddlers to follow. Before long, Western elites were gorging themselves, gobbling up Chinese money like bears in a honey shop. And with each dip of their paw, their greed only swelled. Big tech was the biggest beneficiary. And this is really important because right now, look at the role big tech has played. He says, CCP money powered Silicon Valley startups, a romance kindled by longtime friendship between future California Senator Dianne Feinstein and future General Secretary Jiang Zemin. For decades, Western policymakers insisted they saw China as a rival, but once China became their source of wealth and prestige, they came to see the CCP as a friend and a model. The Western China class was born. Nearly every Western industry has a stake in China, and they all learned to play by CCP rules. Employees could be fired for so much as liking one tweet about Tibet. The film industry was the first to complain about China, but Hollywood soon came to appease Beijing, happily passing all their scripts through CCP censors to tap into China's enormous market. Think tanks and research institutions like the Atlantic Council, Center for American Progress, and world famous Brookings Institute all gorged themselves on Chinese money. Elite universities developed an entire business model around the CCP. Chinese money came in through donations and full freight tuition, and in exchange, professors signed lucrative side deals selling federally funded research to the CCP. So basically, and it goes into things. I'll say one more point though. It says basically that companies, including Nike and Coca Cola, went so far as to lobby against forced labor prevention. Okay. That's where this has come to. Okay. Coca Cola and Nike were against lobbying against forced labor protection in China. That should tell you a lot. I no longer buy Nike products or Coca Cola products. This is a side note. So, how much had how much had China infiltrated our country? So, retired General Robert Spalding, a former Trump admin official, had said, "It's so pervasive, it's better to ask who's not tied to China." That's a very strong thing to think about, okay? Is that it's so pervasive. It's better to ask who's not tied to China. And I agree with some of the commenters. I see Lusky, commenting that China is on the verge of imploding. And yes, that's a critical point. And if you watched my recent episodes, I talk a lot about that. The fact that the CCP is on the verge of collapse. So I don't want this episode to be something that makes you think, oh my gosh, we're screwed and the Chi Coms have it all, and they've been planning for a long time, and we've sold our souls to the devil here. Because the reality is that the CCP truly is on the verge of collapsing, and that's why I think that, as I talked about in my introduction, as I'm going to get into in the show, the more we can come together, we have the ability to push forward that collapse. And as I also mentioned, if you cut the head off the dragon will die. All right, so diving back into uh, the article here that I was reading to you. Let me pull it back up onto full screen for you. There we go. So he's talking about, again, there's Kissinger and I believe is that Deng Xiaoping? Sorry, from that angle I can't tell. Um, or that might have been Mao. But anyway, so kind of going in, this is just describing. I read to you from the book. This is a summary of the actual book, talking about how they've set up their surveillance system. So over the decades, the CCP has constructed a multi-layered system for stifling dissent based on the Soviet psychological warfare technique of Zerchizung, or psychological decomposition, causing individuals to willfully downplay evidence before their own eyes. So, one thing I'm not sure if I mentioned, that the author of the book is Michael Singer. I've tried to reach him. I'd love to have him come on my show. If you know him, let me let him know that I'd like to have him on here. And I will put I'm not sure if I have it on there yet, but actually, this article or this thread I'm sharing with you is in my description. If you want to buy his book, it's a fascinating read. You can order it on there. You can buy the Kindle or you can order the hard copy. I bought the Kindle and I also ordered the hard copy. So I want to give due credit to him because this is brilliant research that he's put together. Some of the best research on China I've seen lately. Um, so let's look at it really quick though. What I talked about there, the psychological decomposition. where it's causing individuals to willfully or play down evidence before their own eyes. What do you think's happening with the jab? What do you think's happening with COVID and everything? People are willfully playing down evidence before their own eyes. They're not even trusting evidence. You can show someone, you can say, look, here's evidence that this doesn't work, whatever you're talking about. And they say, I don't know, I don't see it. Right? It's psychological decomposition. It's intentional. It is absolutely intentional. Okay. Also, so Michael Sanger, it's not the Michael Singer that we're familiar with from the film. It's Sanger, Senger. So I know it sounds the same. So looking at this, so this is talking about just going into China's media dominance, how powerful their propaganda network is. This is a chart that was done by Freedom House showing just in one small instance selected cases of Chinese media influence abroad. So again, if you think that these CNN, New York Times, if you think that these media companies are not being influenced by China, think again, because unfortunately, and as this article continues to show, so much of what we use to form our worldview, Hollywood, social media, the media companies are under very direct control of the Chinese Communist Party. Like it's such an important point. And we're going to talk more about discernment here in the specter of communism. Okay, so kind of diving in again, I hope you can find time to read this article through because it's really, really critical. This is talking about the accounts and how they have all these fake Twitter accounts, et cetera. And this is interesting because I shared this on Telegram. I mentioned this. So in 2021, a brand new Twitter account was instantly verified despite falsely representing itself as a medical doctor. One of the account's followers, this person had 86 followers, was China Daily's chief, confirming the CCP's ability to generate fake verified Twitter doctors without consequence. So if you used to be on Twitter, if you're still on Twitter, if you tried getting verified, like I've got, I don't know, 6,000 followers on Twitter, I don't focus on it. I tried getting verified, no way. So here we have a Chinese doctor with 86 followers that just so happens to have the China Daily, one of China's major propaganda outlets, the chief of that publication as one of the followers, and that doctor has a blue check as verified. Does that not show you, again, does that not show you how much control the Chinese Communist Party has over big tech? If they can be pumping out these fake doctor accounts with blue checks. It's all psychological warfare, and they're the masters of it, and they've been going hard. So this it says the CCP cultivates foreign outlets to produce favorable content and manipulates international search results on platforms like Google. CCP friendly tech giants provide censorship and surveillance assistance, opening the door to whole new levels of influence. That's exactly what we're talking about here. Okay. This is going into the media and how the media is, kind of the role it's playing in covering things up. Now, there's one thing that I'm going to take a step back here. Um, some quotes from Xi Jinping. Now, this is just going into the Uyghurs. So before I jump into unrestricted warfare, there is something I want to bring up that which he mentions brilliantly in this article, or sorry, in his book, is that how did China know that the world was ready for what they're going to roll out? Because if you look at what's happened, people, and he goes into this extensively in the book, our leaders, they're not stupid. They understand the ramifications of lockdowns. They understand what's happening with the jab. They understand whether masks are effective or not, whether social distancing is effective. They understand the psychological effects these things have on us and our children. So the leaders, they know these things. So why are they doing it? How would China, how could China get almost the entirety of the world's elites, the leaders, the government officials, the media, the celebrities, politicians, etc. How could China get them to turn on their people the world over? Look at what's happening in Australia, right? Like it's, and I'm not going to get into it too heavy, but it's insane what's happening there. Like, I have family that literally are not allowed to walk into a store to buy groceries because they are not going along with the medical recommendations of the state in Australia. And they're now having to move their location, move their homes because they can't survive where they are because of this. Like, it's real, folks. It's very real. They've got cops, they've got borders they've set up, they've got blockades, they've got drones, social distance, tracing, contact tracing with apps and everything. It's it's crazy. So, but the people that are in charge, they know it's not good for people. They know it's crushing the economy. They know suicides are skyrocketing, domestic abuse and violence is skyrocketing. Why would these people do this? Well, so here's an interesting point is that China knew that the world would be ripe for this based on a few instances. One was a Tiananmen Square massacre. When the Tiananmen Square massacre happened in 1989, the whole world saw it. And it was a test. It was a test for them to see because you have to think about this. This is after China had really opened up. There was a lot of the earlier economic development was happening. China was making a ton of money, but the rest of the world was making loads of money, hand over fist, making money off of China, governments, etc. So this was a test because what would happen if the whole world witnessed the Tiananmen Square massacre? Would the whole world stand up and say, you know what, China, we're not going to work with you? You just slaughtered thousands of innocent students that were standing up for democracy. You rolled them over with tanks, you shot them, you murdered them. Do you think what happened? What would have happened if the entire world stood up together and said, "You know what, China, we're not going to work with you?" What happened is the opposite. They all the world governments, all the people, they decided to turn a blind eye. And isn't that what's gotten us to where we are right now? Is that we've turned a blind eye to evil for too long. We've accepted that our greed is more important than our values. I'm not saying we as in you and I, but even, if you know there's slave labor in China, why are you buying something that's made in China, right? It's everyone, it's just bit by bit. And so Tiananmen massacre was a significant thing. Tibet, looking what happened with the persecution of the Tibetans. Another big thing, the Uyghur Muslims, right? And as I mentioned earlier, yet you still have China. In China, you still have Nike and Coca-Cola actually lobbying against things that would protect the Chinese citizens from forced labor. Doesn't this show? Like, are we surprised that our governments and our corporations have completely sold us out to tyranny? Again, this is what's leading up to it. Now, there's an excerpt from the book which was fascinating that I want to read to you. This is about censorship and human rights. So it says censorship and human rights. So human rights organizations have helped bring many of the CCP's crimes to light. But in truth, the CCP's atrocities have long been enabled by an international system that downplays them, controls the conversation around them, and actively discourages meaningful action to mitigate them. Right? CCP is within the human rights councils and the UN and everything. It's ridiculous. So in China, this is going back to reading his book. In China, over 1 million members of one religious group have been detained in labor camps, tortured, and re educated. Their biometric data is cataloged and their movements tracked. An independent tribunal found their organs being harvested on an industrial scale. The Chinese press has described them as a poisonous tumor that must be eradicated. The description could pertain to several of China's minority groups, but it most accurately applies to the practitioners of Falun Gong, a Buddhist discipline that grew dramatically after the end of Mao's rule. By 1998, China had over 50 million Falun Gong adherents. Their subsequent persecution established the CCP's playbook for mass repression, internet censorship, and surveillance. So this is really key. I'm speaking here is that this is why you've heard me speak about Falun Gong and the persecution, or if you've read media outlets like the Epoch Times, they cover this. You cannot understand China and who China is today and the Chinese Communist Party without understanding Falun Gong. You have to understand what they have done, even how the Falun Gong became the model that they developed their mass surveillance system for. Like, this is very real. Understand that the organ trade, the massive organ trade happening in China, which I think is also tied to an adrenochrome trade, which is also tied to China and the West and all these things. This stuff is all centered around Falun Gong. And he says in this book, over a million. Some of the numbers that I've found through researching is tens of millions, even. They have been put into labor camps, murdered for their organs, etc. So he continues, yet major news outlets have gone decades without mentioning Falun Gong. This is what's interesting. The New York Times ran 17 articles with Chinese datelines about Falun Gong in the first half of 2001. The persecution started in 1999. Okay, so keep that in mind. So, so they ran 17 articles. There's your 17. They ran 17 articles with Chinese datelines about Falun Gong in the first half in 6 months in 2001. In the 18 years since, just five articles in the 18 years since. A collapse that began, listen to this, a collapse that began just after the Times senior staff met with the CCP officials to negotiate the unblocking of their website in China. There you go. New York Times not covering one of the worst human rights atrocities ever, one of the worst ever. But if you look at the New York Times, you look at how they covered the Holodomor, Ukraine, they were over there, praising Stalin during that time. So again, mainstream media are complicit. If someone reads the New York Times, right, and they say, "I trust the New York Times," you should ask them this. Point these things out to them. It's like you cannot trust a news media like that is going to censor itself from covering one of the worst atrocities because they want access to the Chinese market. It goes further than that. Going back to his book. In 2010, the Washington Post killed an article about Falun Gong after a phone call from the Chinese embassy. Canada's national broadcaster canceled a Falun Gong documentary after the CCP threatened its rights to the 2008 Beijing Olympics. This collective amnesia is a case study in how Western media constructs reality to treat engagement with the CCP as palatable while professing solidarity with its victims. Even human rights organizations have been reluctant to discuss Falun Gong. In 2005, Human Rights Watch, again, even the human rights organizations have fallen under this. So back to what he says. He says, in 2005, Human Rights Watch issued a report that included this brief, chilling reference. Several petitioners reported that the longest sentences and the worst treatment were meted out to members of the banned meditation group Falun Gong. Even longtime Chinese activists are afraid to say the group's name aloud. One Beijing petitioner said, "Petitioners are usually locked up directly, but the worst," she whispers, "is Falun Gong. They have terrible treatment, not like the others." In the years since, Human Rights Watch has never discussed Falun Gong again. Again, as I mentioned, this is what you ask: how did China have the confidence? How did Xi Jinping have the confidence to push forward with this? They have seen over and over and over again that the people in the West, the leaders in the West, they have bought and they've blackmailed and that they have influenced and coerced, do not have a backbone to stand up against them. And so they knew that timing was ripe for them to implement COVID and the global lockdown measures and everything. So again, now I'm going to get into back to the article here and show you more about basically how China had orchestrated this. Let me pull this back up for you. Okay, so basically, what he's exposing here is how China had intentionally put out all of these videos and pictures that you saw. All these pictures, if you remember at the beginning of the pandemic, all of this was intentional misinformation. This was just to make people, even the fact checkers, even BuzzFeed is seeing through it. Okay, that they were intentionally releasing this to make the world frightened of coronavirus. Okay, people dying, all these different clips of people dying. This is all done intentionally. They even had, there's a woman, I think I showed you this woman, um, did I show it to you yet? Okay, no, right down here. There's a woman that died in a scooter accident, okay, right here. This woman died in a scooter accident, yet the narrative was that the police killed her for trying to escape a COVID quarantine center, okay? This is Soviet-style disinformation. This is what it is, because they had to build fear. They had to build a massive amount of fear around the world so that people would that way the global citizens would go along with their leaders in the lockdown measures. Even this guy, if you remember seeing him, the Chinese doctor Li Wenliang, who was the one that spoke out and he revealed the pandemic and everything ahead of time. He was the whistleblower, and then he disappeared. Even he was entirely fake. It was fake. His entire personality, everything. It's very easy to see straight through his story. Okay, it's all fake. It's all about making people fear what's happening there. Okay, kind of continuing on. Yeah, the New York Times reporting on that. The going into how the New York Times was reporting on that. Everyone is just continuing to puppet the narrative. Now, getting into lockdowns, the experts know lockdowns have never been an effective way of stopping the spread of something. It's never been used in history before. So there's a whole thing in here that goes into the lockdowns and the lack of evidence for the lockdowns. Yet, as soon as she called for lockdowns, you had the WHO, you had the world leaders all completely echoing it. Here you go. So when the lockdown in Wuhan, the WHO's representative in China noted that trying to contain a city of 11 million people is new to science, right? Unprecedented. Then you had, even though human rights people were coming out and speaking against it, right? Exactly. String Gene. Lockdowns killed at least 3 times as many as the seasonal flu. I agree. Okay. I also see Fernando F20 asking, what's the connection between the CCP and the globalists and Rothschilds? I did a whole article, or sorry, a whole video called "It's Dog Eat Dog." It's got a picture of Xi Jinping and George Soros on there. If you look through my YouTube videos, I did an entire over hour long episode specifically about the CCP and the globalists. I highly recommend that you check it out. So again, here's Tedros. He was a communist that got put into power by the CCP in the WHO, echoing, follow China, follow China. Everyone is just saying, copy China, follow China. Okay. Everything, everything of how the world responded to COVID came from the Chinese protocols. It came from Xi Jinping putting out, here's how you handle it. We've had a miracle thing. We've had a miracle in Wuhan. We've used lockdowns to solve it. They built this massive fear of it. They showed everyone Wuhan going crazy, and then they showed Wuhan being perfect and said, "Hey, follow China." It was the whole thing is a psyop. The whole thing was a psyop to get the world to follow in lockstep China's orders of locking down the entire world, crushing economies, killing people. Now, do I believe it's a real virus? Yeah, it's a real virus, but it's a variation of the flu. It's not what they want you to think it is. So what's crazy though is that even this. So in 2015, he made one trip to the UK, and Xi Jinping, and he visited. This is in 2015. He visited this UK, this university, this special arrangement to work with China. So Xi Jinping visited this university. This university is where one of the major studies when COVID came out, one of the studies of models that predicted the deaths came out from this exact university. All these things are tying back to China. All these people who wrote the reports on showing the models, they wrote the papers, pushing for pandemics, they all have China ties. It's insane. Okay, this goes. I really recommend that you read through this all. It's it's Metal Avengers saying it too. It's hard stuff, but really important to know, and that's the truth. So if you read through, it'll take you about an hour to read through this thread I posted. You will learn so much. It's so important. Okay, so getting into this, He's just exposing the authors of these reports. Now, here's again the social media. This is crazy. Okay, you want to look about bots? This is I gotta play this for you. Look at this. This, those are all cell phones. That is a Chinese bot farm. They've got those everywhere. They have so many fake profiles. And again, this just goes into show, and there's you can share this with your friends. He goes in and shows all the people, all of these profiles echoing the exact same things, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, YouTube comments. The CCP brilliantly knew that if they could control the narrative on the internet through their bots, they could control so much. They could control us, they could control people, the perceptions of politicians. Look at all this. These are all bots posting the same content. There's an Italian message that came out about all in this together. Again, same bots all pushing and sharing the same thing. When people like Governor Christie Noem refuse to do a lockdown, if you look at these comments, her Twitter feed is full of this vicious things repeating the same thing, evil, wretched comments. So if she looked at that Twitter feed, she might think, "Oh my gosh, like I'm doing terrible things." Same thing when Brian Kemp also wanted to do that. The same exact hatred came out towards Brian Kemp. It just goes and goes. They've created it's all a lie that they've used to push this. So again, now this is what I'm going to get into. One thing I'm going to try to tighten up a few things, but even the use of the treatment. Okay, the use of the treatment that if you look at remember the mechanical ventilation, all the vents they're putting people on. The vents which had I think it was a study later showed that 90 to 97% mortality rate among those over 65 who received ventilation. They knew the vents were killing people. Why do we use vents on people? If you remember this doctor coming out, speaking out against this, using ventilators, all of that was based on a study in China that said ventilators are how you should treat COVID. PCR test. PCR test. The reason we're using a PCR test, all referencing China. In the UK government's official coronavirus action plan from March 3rd, 2020, discussing social distancing, school closures, and rapid COVID test and vaccine development, nearly every source the government cited was from China. All the measures outlined in New Zealand's official COVID-19 elimination strategy document physical distancing, widespread testing, surveillance were adopted based from China on a report from China. It all goes back to China. All right, so I'm going to zoom towards the end here, and I've got some broader points I'm going to make. Even here's a video of the FBI Director Christopher Wray. You want to talk about your local politicians? Watch this.
And I will note that the pandemic has unfortunately not stopped any of this. In fact, we've heard from federal, state, and even local officials that Chinese diplomats are aggressively urging support for China's handling of the COVID-19 crisis. Yes, this is happening at both the federal and state levels. Not that long ago, we had a state senator who was recently even asked to introduce a resolution supporting China's response to the pandemic.
There he goes, Christopher Wray, talking about how all these politicians, even at the local level, it could be a mayor of a small town, they're being pressured by Chinese officials. Okay, and here, all these tweets talking about how China controlled the virus. Now, this is important. This is insane. Lockdown propaganda relied on two key principles inherent to virtually all official communication on COVID. The first was that China's measures were the only ones proven effective. The second was that fear was necessary to ensure compliance for lockdowns to succeed. I did not know this is information I found astounding and frightening. Okay, this graph right here, I'm going to show you this. This is a graph, and it's kind of hard to see. You want to measure fear in people? This is in America. This is the average perceived chance of dying from the coronavirus. This black line, what this tells you is that people in America 39 and under, this is the most recently we've done, this is in late June, people under 39 and under believed on average they had a 10% chance of dying from COVID. We know what the death rates are. So people in America under 40 believe, this is back in June, they had a 10% chance of dying. What does that tell you about the fear propaganda that's put out there? You know what's even worse? Australia. Okay, let me zoom in real quick for this. So they did a research. This is in July, okay, about the COVID. And the poll, this is Australians, that Australians revealed, the poll believed that on average, that they believe there's a 38% chance of dying from the Delta strain. 38% chance of dying from the Delta strain. That's the fear. That's where this comes from. Like a 38% chance. Gosh, think about that. Think about the average person that you meet thinking that there's almost a 40% chance they're going to die. How would you not be living in fear? That's like worse than Ebola. Again, they had to have the fear. They had to have the fear. And so again, the media perpetuated it. The media pushed this. Okay. Now, then also censoring people that spoke out against it. The whole thing, it goes back. You can see it's this whole orchestrated thing. So now, sorry, this has been a little bit of a heavy episode because, um, it just is. You know, like our world is we're undergoing an attack from globalists and communists that they want to destroy what we hold dear, but I don't believe that they're going to succeed in that. And so here's an important thing. Actually, I'm going to share this with you. Okay. This is also from the book. I pulled this out because I want to read it to you. This is a short. Xi Jinping always believed that true leadership meant leading by example. One evil deed on its own may not amount to much, but to be one of history's great dictators, one had to bring out the evil in others. These leaders had performed several evil miracles over long careers of tyranny. Xi had his work cut out for him if he's going to make it. So basically, what it's saying, and this is the important point here, is that, and it goes and further to this in the book, is that Xi Jinping recognized that he cannot become a supreme leader of the world if he didn't get people to collapse morally. If people were not living in fear, if people were not, speaking out against their neighbor, etc., they could not be controlled. And so he realized that basically, and this is what communism realized, they had to eat away at the morality of people. And this becomes our weapon. Our morality, our virtue is our weapon. Now, I'm going to read you something. I'll pull up um, something that I think is very, very important. So, this is the Epoch Times. I know that you guys are familiar with the Epoch Times. They have published a book, and you can also get it on the web. This link is below, called How the Specter of Communism is Ruling Our World. So, this is an actual book. They've gotten like a video series of it. If there's one thing that you read, I highly, highly recommend this, because this is what truly exposes communism, which we have to understand what it is to fight against it. As much as we want to focus on the political theater of DC and who gets elected here, who gets elected there, um, if we don't understand our enemy as communism and we continue to fight left versus right, straight versus gay, all the different wars and the race wars they're pushing, we're going to miss the point. It's like there's a dragon in the room getting ready to eat us, and we're busy squabbling over, hey, you're wearing my shoes. Like that's how silly this is. So I want to read. So you can also down here you can read the actual text version of this as well. But I want to read you something because this is different than any other book. This is different than any book I've ever read on communism, and I highly recommend you. You can buy it as a book. It's like a three-part. It's like three different books to it, but because this approaches communism from a spiritual level, which again, you've heard me talk about this, is that this is a spiritual battle, it's a spiritual war. So I want to read you that part of this. Okay, this is just the introduction to part of the book, and this is really important. Communism, a devil hell bent on the destruction of humanity. The Communist Manifesto begins with the sentence, "A specter is haunting Europe," the specter of communism. The use of the term specter was not a whim on the part of Karl Marx. As we argue in this book, communism should not be understood as an ideological movement, a political doctrine, or a failed attempt at a new way of ordering human affairs. Instead, it should be understood as a devil, an evil specter forged by hate, degeneracy, and other elemental forces in the universe. Skipping down, I'm going to read these 4 paragraphs to end that. Man was created by the divine, and divine compassion has long protected man. The devil knew this, and so it set about severing this connection in order to corrupt man and ensure that the divine would no longer take care of him. The devil's approach has been to subvert the culture given to mankind by the divine in order to undermine human morality and thus warp man, making him unworthy of salvation. Both good and evil, the divine and the devil, reside in the heart of every person. A life can sink into immoral decadence or elevate through moral cultivation. Those who believe in the divine know that by striving for moral conduct and thought, one's righteous thoughts can be strengthened by the divine, and the divine will allow miracles to happen. The divine will also help one's morality rise in level so as to help one become a nobler person, in the end, allowing one to return to heaven. A person of low morality, however, is filled with selfishness, desire, greed, ignorance, and hubris. While the divine will never recognize such thoughts and actions, the devil will magnify them, intensifying his selfishness and wickedness. Manipulated to commit wrongdoing, he thus creates more karma and further moral decay, and causes further moral decay until in the end only hell awaits him. If the moral standards of human society as a whole decline, the devil will hasten this trend with the goal of causing more sins, more karma, and humanity's eventual destruction. So that's such an important thing. And that's how I want to transition into the kind of conclusion of where we're at. I know I've gone over an hour, but you're still here. So, um, but and then I'll do some question and answer. And there's a few other topics, including the jab, I want to talk about a little more over on Rise TV. But this is the point: is we have to really understand with a very strong discernment who the real enemy is. Because, and again, this is why I don't watch Fox News very much. I like to see what Tucker's doing or his new documentary, et cetera. But so much of what you see in our society, and look for this, they only point to the other side. Very few people point to the real enemy, which is communism and Satan, basically, and evil. And so again, and how I develop my discernment and how I look at people is I say, do they see that as the real enemy? Because even if I spend my entire life dedicated to exposing Antifa and maybe exposing even Hillary Clinton herself, and Durham arrests Hillary Clinton, it doesn't mean anything. I'm sorry. I know it's difficult, and I know a lot of people are kind of on the edge of their seats for like, when's this going to happen? When's that going to happen? The reality is that if China goes unchecked, it doesn't matter who gets arrested. They will be on a course to own everything. And so, but as I mentioned, I've mentioned before in multiple episodes, China truly is on the verge of collapse, and that's critical. And I will I forget what there's a handful of episodes I talked about recently with that end game part 1 and 2 are really good. But there's a whole lot of reasons why there is hope. I believe that one of the episodes was prepare for the worst, hope for the best. And that was one where I went really heavy into China and its coming collapse, because I believe that China, the CCP, is going to collapse very soon. But for us to fight against this enemy, there's a few things that become really important. Number one is virtue. I'm not a preacher and I'm not really an overly religious person, but virtue is so important, because the devil works his ways through our gaps, through our sin, through all the anger, the greed, the jealousy. You look at what's happening between left and right, between jabbed and unjabbed, between parents and school teachers. Our country is just foaming at the mouth. And if you look at color revolutions, if you look at how communist dictators come in and take over societies, it's getting the society pitted against each other so much. We're so focused on what happens in DC and all this stuff, and I hate Pelosi and all these different things, while the real enemy is lurking in the shadows, just waiting for us. So if we're going to counteract this enemy, well, for one, we have to understand it. So the two books I mentioned in here, the one about the lockdowns and then the specter of communism, if you can, I highly recommend that you read those books, especially the specter of communism book. Understand communism. But also beyond that, we have to live our lives with virtue. And that means that we have to get over the divisions we have. And again, and part of what I wanted this episode to be was to help you understand the real enemy of China. So, say you have your friend. Say you live in Australia and your friends they don't want to touch you because you haven't gotten the jab. Well, we realize that there are the majority of the population on average think that there's a 40% chance of dying of the Delta variant. Like, have some compassion for them. I know that they're just following along and they're just watching the media and they can't get it off, but they're being manipulated by the most talented propagandists and manipulators on earth. These people are being manipulated. So we have to be the ones to rise above that. We have to be the ones to extend an olive branch. Because as I mentioned in the end, Xi Jinping, he realized that he will only be able to succeed if he can turn the whole world evil. Why do you think they're closing down churches but not strip clubs? Why are they, censoring, talking about November 2020, but they're not censoring our kids finding pornography? Why are all these things? Why are these leaders pushing for things that are going to breed immorality? Look what's happening in California. Look at all the gender issues. Why is that all happening? Because they're trying to divide us and push us towards hell. So how we can counteract that is by strengthening ourselves morally, strengthening our faith, getting back involved with your spiritual community, getting back to all going to church again, like whatever it takes for you to really find that moral fortitude to push ahead, because that is what's going to make us win. And again, we talk about God wins and we talk about God is on our side. Well, yes, but God is on the side of those who are truly good people and the people that have courage to stand up, but also the people that have the courage to set aside their own egos. So when your friend says, hey, you didn't get the jab, like stay away from me, like you don't get angry at them, right? You turn your other cheek. We've been taught this before, right? So again, like as difficult as it is, we're in this situation because China and because we sold our souls to China. That's just the reality of it. But we can get ourselves out of this. And this is what I see happening. I'm encouraged because, I go to the Clay Clark events and I speak. And next week, I won't be doing a live show because I'll be speaking out at Clay Clark's event in San Antonio. But there is a resurgence happening. This is what and it genuinely gives me hope and inspiration because the Great Awakening is happening. And to me, the Great Awakening is not like everyone now knows what the cabal is. No, the Great Awakening is that people are spitting out Satan. People are rejecting evil and they're turning towards God. To me, that's the Great Awakening. And that's the awakening that will save our world from the grasp of Satan. So it might be it's a difficult time ahead. Um, it already has been tough. It might get even tougher, but root yourself in faith. Bring your family close to you. Forgive people. Turn your other cheek, and we will get through this. So, all right. So if we're now going to transfer over to Rise TV. Yeah, thank you. This is a tough one, and I'm sorry if this was a little bit difficult to swallow all at once. And I try to always focus on the positive stuff, and I know there's been some really good things happening with some of the politics in America and everything. But I don't know. I don't want to just to kind of buy into like the everything's going to be okay because we have to understand who the true enemy is, and that's what this is all about. So I hope that through understanding our enemy and understanding how to beat that enemy, that's what gives you hope. I hope that it helps give you some faith, some encouragement to keep pushing on, because you that are watching, and I thank you for watching me, but you are the hope for the people around you. You have to be the one to turn your other cheek, to stand strong, to have faith, to show compassion, to do what's right, and to stand up against tyranny, to stand up against the mandates. I know it's difficult, but they will only allow these things. Basically, these things will only work if we allow them to. So all right. So, okay, we're going to transfer over to Rise TV. So, for those of you that aren't familiar with Rise TV, I try to do as much content as I can for free. But I do this full time. My wife does this full time. My 1 year old, she does it full time. She's writing scripts and everything. But so Rise TV is a streaming platform. I call it the non-satanic Netflix, if I want to say that. I'm one of the owners of it. I joined a few other patriots on there. If you want to come over there, there's a free trial in the description of the video. If you want to check it out, you can come over there. It's completely uncensored. We just published a great movie on there, Trump I Know. It's basically like, imagine Rise TV as the non-satanic version of Netflix. I do 3 live shows every week over on there, so I do a lot of content on there. So if you want to check it out, if you want to support me, it's a good way. And if you just want to hop over to check out the conversation, ask me a few questions about the jab, and then maybe cancel, you're not really happy with it, it's okay. That's why there's a free trial. You can try it out. So, thank you everyone for joining me today. I feel like this is an important episode. I hope you can share it with your friends. Also, remember to go to my website, maninamerica.com, sign up for my email list over there, follow me on Telegram. I'm going to keep at it. And if you're going to be in San Antonio for Clay Clark's event next week, come introduce yourself. I love meeting you folks in person. I love taking pictures with you, doing little videos with you. I love it. So if you're going to be there, great. Otherwise, I will try as usual to post my speech up there. I'm actually speaking, I'm the speaker right before General Flynn on Friday. So I'm actually going to be introducing and bringing General Flynn onto stage, which I'm like incredibly honored to do that. So thank you all. I will see you. Hopefully, you'll be watching it, Clay Clark's event, and after that, back to the normal schedule. So thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and I have to end the other streaming services. So give me a second. Let me say, oops. All right. Okay, let's go to YouTube. All right, bye bye, YouTube. Thank you so much, all the YouTube folks. All right. Thank you, YouTube. Bye bye.